My fiancé tweeted, "Planning a wedding is so stressful when your partner doesn't help," while I was literally sitting next to her with vendor contracts. I quote tweeted, "Don't worry, problem solved," and posted pictures of cancellation confirmation. Her notifications exploded. I, 29M, thought I knew my fiancé after 3 years together. Turns out, I was completely wrong about who she really was. The whole thing started 6 months ago when we got engaged. Everything seemed perfect at first. We'd been living together for 2 years, had our finances somewhat merged, and everyone said we were the ideal couple. The proposal went smoothly, and she said yes with tears in her eyes. I genuinely thought we were on the same page about everything. Planning the wedding became my second job. I'm a software engineer, so I approach problems methodically. I created spreadsheets for everything: budget tracking, vendor comparisons, timeline management, guest lists organized by table arrangements. I researched venues for weeks, called dozens of photographers, and even learned about flower varieties I'd never heard of. My browser history looked like a wedding planner's fever dream. Every evening after work, I'd come home with new quotes, contract drafts, or vendor brochures. I'd spread everything across our dining table and walk her through the options. I genuinely enjoyed the process because I thought we were building our future together. She'd nod along, make suggestions, and we'd make decisions as a team. Or so I believed. The first red flag came when her sister visited. They were talking in the kitchen while I worked on seating charts at the dining table. Her sister mentioned how lucky she was to have someone so involved in wedding planning. Instead of agreeing, my fiancé laughed and said something about how men usually leave everything to their partners. I brushed it off as casual conversation, but something about her tone felt off. Then her friends started making comments. During a dinner party, one of them joked about how she must be doing all the real work while I probably just showed up for cake tastings. Everyone laughed, including my fiancé. I forced a smile, but internally, I was confused. These people had seen me discussing vendor contracts and timeline details. They knew I was actively involved. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks ago. I'd spent my lunch break on calls with 3 different caterers, negotiating menu options and pricing. After work, I stopped by 2 venues to check acoustics and lighting setups. I got home around 7 with a folder full of contracts and vendor agreements. My fiancée was already home, scrolling through her phone on the couch. I spread the contracts across the coffee table and started explaining what I'd learned. The first caterer could do our preferred menu but needed a larger deposit. The second offered better pricing but had limited dietary accommodation options. The third was perfect but had limited availability. She was nodding along, asking questions about pricing and menu options. We spent over an hour going through everything, making pro and con lists, and narrowing down our choices. She seemed engaged and appreciative of the work I'd done. I remember feeling satisfied that we were making real progress. That's when she picked up her phone and started typing. I assumed she was taking notes or messaging her sister about our decisions. Instead, she posted on Twitter, "Planning a wedding is so stressful when your partner doesn't help at all. Feeling overwhelmed and doing everything alone." I was sitting less than 2 feet away from her. The vendor contracts were literally spread between us on the coffee table. I had caterer business cards in my hand and venue photos pulled up on my laptop screen. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a misunderstanding or miscommunication. She had actively participated in our planning session, acknowledged my work, asked detailed questions about pricing and logistics, and then immediately posted about how I wasn't helping. The deliberate nature of it made everything worse. I didn't say anything immediately. I needed to process what had just happened. Here was someone I planned to marry, someone I trusted completely, lying about me to hundreds of her followers. And not just lying, creating a narrative that painted me as an unreliable partner who left her to handle everything alone. I watched the likes and comments start rolling in. Her friends were responding with supportive messages about how typical this was for men, how she deserved better, how wedding planning really shows someone's true colors. Each notification felt like another knife twist. The worst part was seeing responses from people who knew both of us. Colleagues from her work, mutual friends, even some of my own friends were liking and commenting with sympathy. They all believed her version of events without question. Some even added their own stories about useless male partners who couldn't handle basic responsibilities. I sat there for 20 minutes, watching this alternate reality take shape on social media. In this version, I was a deadbeat fiancé who couldn't be bothered to help with basic wedding tasks. Meanwhile, the actual reality was sitting right there on our coffee table. Hours of research, dozens of phone calls, carefully organized contracts, and vendor comparisons. Something fundamental shifted in how I saw our relationship. This wasn't about wedding stress or communication issues. This was about character. She was willing to publicly humiliate me and damage my reputation for social media validation. The woman I planned to marry had just thrown me under the bus for Twitter likes. I started thinking about other incidents with new perspective. The comments to her sister, the dinner party jokes, the way she never corrected people when they assumed I wasn't helping. This wasn't a one-time thing. She'd been building this narrative for months, maybe longer. I was just too trusting to see it. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just regular anger, but the cold, calculating kind that comes with complete betrayal. She had humiliated me publicly while I sat right next to her, doing exactly what she claimed I wasn't doing. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I opened my laptop and started going through our wedding planning documents. Everything was organized in shared folders with timestamps showing who did what. The majority of research, vendor outreach, and coordination had my name attached. I had documentation proving the complete opposite of what she'd just posted. Then I looked at our financial records. The wedding deposits, vendor payments, and planning expenses were mostly coming from my accounts. I'd been covering about 70% of all wedding costs without making a big deal about it. I just wanted our day to be perfect and figured we'd sort out the financial details later. That's when I realized the full scope of what was happening. Not only was she misrepresenting my contributions to hundreds of people, she was doing it while I was actively subsidizing the wedding she was supposedly planning alone. The audacity was stunning. I spent the next hour screenshotting everything. Vendor emails with my name as the primary contact. Payment confirmations from my accounts. Calendar entries showing my vendor meetings and venue visits. Planning documents I'd created and shared. I had enough evidence to completely destroy her narrative, but I wanted to be strategic about how I used it. My first instinct was to comment directly on her post with receipts, but that felt reactionary and small. She'd made a calculated move to damage my reputation. My response needed to be equally calculated but more decisive. That's when I remembered something important. Most of our vendor contracts had cancellation clauses. We'd specifically chosen vendors with flexible terms because we wanted options if anything changed. I'd negotiated these terms myself during the planning process she claimed I wasn't participating in. I started pulling up vendor contracts and reading cancellation policies. The venue could be canceled with 30 days notice for a partial refund. The caterer had a 2-week cancellation window. The photographer required 15 days notice. The florist was completely flexible. Most deposits were partially refundable if we canceled soon enough. The idea started forming slowly, then all at once. She wanted to play games on social media? Fine. But actions have consequences, and she was about to learn that lesson in the most public way possible. I opened a new browser tab and started the cancellation process. Venue first. I called their after-hours number and left a detailed voicemail requesting immediate cancellation. The caterer had an online portal where I could submit cancellation requests. I filled out the form and requested confirmation emails. The photographer was more complicated since we developed a good relationship. I called him directly and explained that we were having second thoughts about the wedding timeline. He was understanding and agreed to cancel with a partial deposit refund. He even thanked me for giving him enough notice to book someone else. By midnight, I had cancellation confirmations for every major vendor. The venue, caterer, photographer, florist, DJ, and even the cake designer. Everything was canceled. Our wedding was officially not happening, and I had email confirmations proving it. But I wasn't done yet. I took screenshots of all the cancellation confirmations and compiled them into a clean, organized image. Then I crafted my response tweet. I kept it simple and factual. Don't worry, problem solved. I quote tweeted her original post and attached the screenshot compilation of cancellation confirmations. I hit send and watch what happened next. The response was immediate and explosive. Her post had maybe 40 likes and a dozen supportive comments. My quote tweet started getting attention within minutes. Retweets, likes, and comments began flooding in at a pace I'd never experienced. People were tagging their friends, sharing it to other platforms, and commenting with everything from shocked emoji to detailed breakdowns of what had just happened. Someone called it the nuclear option. Another person said it was the most savage response to wedding drama they'd ever seen. But the real chaos started when people began connecting the dots. Her original post claimed I wasn't helping with wedding planning. My response included cancellation emails for vendors, which proved I'd been the primary contact for most of them. The timestamps on the cancellations showed I'd canceled everything within hours of her tweet. Her notifications must have been going insane. My tweet was getting shared exponentially, and every share brought more attention back to her original post. People were screenshotting the entire exchange and posting it everywhere. Someone even made it into a TikTok with dramatic music. The comments on my tweet were overwhelmingly supportive. People were praising me for dodging a bullet and calling my response legendary. But the comments on her original post had shifted dramatically. What started as supportive responses from her friends had turned into questions about what really happened. I went to bed that night watching the numbers climb. By morning, my quote tweet had over 50,000 likes and had been shared thousands of times. The original exchange was showing up on wedding shaming groups, relationship advice forums, and drama compilation accounts. Update 1. I woke up to my phone buzzing constantly. Text messages, missed calls, social media notifications, everything was going off at once. The tweet had exploded overnight in ways I never could have imagined. My fiancé had called me 17 times and left multiple voicemails. I didn't listen to them immediately, but the text messages gave me a clear picture of her emotional journey. The first few were angry, demanding to know what I'd done and why I was being so dramatic. Then they shifted to panic as the social media response grew. The most recent ones were pleading for me to take down the tweet and call her back. But it wasn't just her contacting me. I had messages from friends, family members, co-workers, and even people I barely knew. Some were supportive, others were confused, and a few were critical of my approach. My phone literally couldn't keep up with all the notifications. The wedding shaming groups had picked up the story and were dissecting every detail. Someone had found her social media profiles and was analyzing her previous posts for patterns. They discovered that complaining about me on Twitter was actually a recurring theme going back months. This was news to me, and it hurt more than I expected. I started scrolling through her older tweets and found dozens of subtle digs at my character. Comments about how I left dishes in the sink, how I didn't notice when she got her hair done, how I focused too much on work. Death by 1,000 cuts, all published for her followers to see. What made it worse was that many of these tweets were posted right after we'd had good times together. She'd tweet about me being inattentive on the same day we'd gone on a nice date. She'd complain about my housekeeping habits hours after we'd cooked dinner together and watched a movie. I realized I'd been living in a completely different relationship than she was. While I thought we were building something together, she was building a social media narrative about what a disappointing boyfriend I was. Every minor disagreement or normal relationship moment became content for her victim narrative. My sister called around noon, having seen the whole thing unfold on Facebook where someone had shared it. She was worried about me, but also curious about what had really been happening in my relationship. I ended up talking to her for over an hour, explaining the whole situation from the beginning. During our conversation, she mentioned something that really stuck with me. She said that my ex-fiancé had always seemed performative when they interacted, like she was playing a role rather than being genuine. My sister had chalked it up to nervousness around family, but now she was wondering if that performative quality extended to other areas. That afternoon, I decided to listen to the voicemails. The progression was remarkable. The first few were angry rants about how I'd embarrassed her and made her look bad. She accused me of being vindictive and said I'd ruined everything over a simple misunderstanding. But as the social media response continued growing, her tone changed completely. The later voicemails were tearful apologies mixed with desperate attempts to control the narrative. She claimed the original tweet had been a mistake, that she was just stressed and not thinking clearly. She begged me to post a follow-up explaining that we'd worked things out. The final voicemail was the most telling. She admitted that her friends were asking difficult questions about the vendor cancellations. How could I cancel everything so quickly if I wasn't involved in planning? Why did I have access to all the vendor contacts if she was doing everything alone? Her own social circle was starting to see through the contradiction. I decided to call her back, but not for the reasons she was hoping. When she answered, I could hear that she'd been crying. She immediately launched into apologies and explanations, saying she was just overwhelmed and didn't mean what she'd posted. She promised she'd delete the original tweet and post a correction if I would just take down my response. I let her finish, then asked her a simple question. How many times had she tweeted complaints about me without mentioning them to me directly? The silence stretched for almost 30 seconds. Then she tried to deflect, saying that Twitter was just where she vented and it wasn't meant to be taken seriously. When I pressed for a specific number, she admitted she couldn't remember all of them. That's when I told her I'd spent the morning reading through months of her tweets. The wedding planning complaint wasn't an isolated incident or a stress response. It was part of a pattern of publicly undermining me while pretending everything was fine in person. She tried to argue that everyone complains about their partners on social media, that it was normal and didn't mean anything. But I pointed out that there's a difference between occasional venting and consistently building a narrative that your partner is inadequate. She'd been systematically damaging my reputation for months, maybe longer. The conversation ended when I told her that canceling the wedding wasn't just about the tweet. It was about the realization that I'd been engaged to someone who was willing to humiliate me publicly for social media validation. Someone who saw our relationship as content for her victim narrative rather than a genuine partnership. She hung up on me. Update 2. The next few days were surreal. The story had taken on a life of its own across multiple social media platforms. Someone had turned it into a Reddit post that made it to the front page. TikTok creators were making response videos. I even saw it referenced in a Twitter thread about main character syndrome in relationships. But the real-world consequences were starting to hit both of us differently than I'd expected. My ex-fiancée's friends and family were reaching out to me privately. Her sister called to apologize for her behavior and admitted she'd witnessed the pattern of public complaints but hadn't known how to address it. Several of her friends sent messages saying they'd always wondered about the disconnect between how she described our relationship online versus how we seemed in person. Most surprising was a message from her mother. She asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss what had happened. I was hesitant, but curiosity won out. Her mother was more direct than I'd expected. She told me that she'd been concerned about her daughter's social media habits for months. The constant complaints and victim narratives had extended beyond just our relationship. She'd been tweeting about problems with friends, coworkers, family members, and even random service interactions. Everything was someone else's fault, and everyone was disappointing her. According to her mother, this pattern had started in college and had gotten progressively worse over the years. Social media had become her primary way of processing any negative emotions, but instead of working through problems constructively, she'd learned to mine them for sympathy and validation. Her mother asked if I thought there was any chance of reconciliation. I explained that the issue wasn't just about the wedding tweet, but about the fundamental dishonesty of maintaining a fake public narrative while pretending everything was fine privately. Trust, once broken that completely, couldn't be easily rebuilt. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my own unexpected consequences. The vendor cancellations had saved us money, but they'd also created complications I hadn't considered. Several vendors required written explanations for the cancellations. Our venue coordinator wanted to understand what had happened, since we'd seemed like such an engaged and organized couple. I found myself explaining the situation repeatedly, and each conversation reinforced how elaborate my ex-fiancée's deception had been. These vendors had worked with me directly for months. They knew I was involved in every detail of the planning process. Her claim that I wasn't helping wasn't just false. It was completely contradicted by their professional experience. The financial untangling was more complex than expected. Since I'd paid for most of the deposits and vendor fees, I was entitled to most of the refunds. But some vendors had policies requiring both parties to sign off on cancellations for shared services. My ex-fiancée was initially refusing to cooperate, hoping to force me into reconsidering the entire situation. That changed when her employer's HR department got involved. Someone had recognized her in the viral social media exchange and reported it as a potential professionalism issue. Her company had strict social media policies for employees, especially regarding public disputes and viral content that could reflect poorly on the organization. She was required to meet with HR to discuss the situation and potentially face disciplinary action. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her quest for social media validation had created real professional consequences that went far beyond our relationship. After that meeting, she became much more cooperative with the vendor cancellation process. She signed the necessary paperwork and even helped clarify some details with vendors who had questions. The process moved quickly once she stopped being obstructive. I also started hearing from mutual friends who were taking sides in ways I hadn't expected. Some people felt I'd gone too far with such a public response. They argued that relationship problems should be handled privately and that my tweet was unnecessarily vindictive. But others pointed out that she'd made our relationship problems public first. I'd simply responded to her public narrative with documented facts. If she wanted to keep relationship issues private, she shouldn't have been tweeting about them for months. The divide was interesting to observe. People who had experienced similar betrayals in their own relationships tended to be more supportive of my approach. Those who hadn't dealt with public humiliation from a partner were more critical of the nuclear response. I found myself reflecting on whether I'd handled things correctly. The immediate satisfaction of the revenge tweet had given way to more complex feelings about the whole situation. I didn't regret canceling the wedding. That relationship was clearly built on a foundation I hadn't recognized. But I wondered if there had been a better way to address the underlying issues. Update 3. A month later, the social media attention had finally died down, but the personal aftermath was still unfolding in unexpected ways. I'd started therapy to process everything that had happened. My therapist helped me understand that the relationship had been emotionally abusive in ways I hadn't recognized. The pattern of public humiliation while maintaining private normalcy was a form of psychological manipulation designed to control my perception of our relationship. According to my therapist, many people in similar situations don't realize how damaging this behavior is because it seems minor compared to other forms of abuse. But systematic reputation damage and public humiliation can be just as harmful to someone's mental health and social connections. The therapy sessions helped me understand why I'd been so shocked by her behavior. I'd been operating under the assumption that we were genuine partners who occasionally disagreed. I hadn't realized that she saw our relationship as content to be curated and managed for maximum sympathy from her audience. Meanwhile, my ex-fiancée had apparently started her own therapy journey, though with different goals. Her sister mentioned that she was working on rebuilding her online presence and learning to communicate better in relationships. The focus seemed to be on managing her image rather than addressing the underlying character issues. She deleted most of her complaint tweets and had started posting more positive content about self-improvement and personal growth. But several people had screenshot the old tweets before she removed them, so the evidence of the pattern still existed in various online spaces. The professional consequences had been more severe than initially expected. While she hadn't been fired, she'd been removed from client-facing roles and social media responsibilities at work. Her company was concerned about the judgment she'd shown in creating viral controversial content that could be linked back to their organization. From a financial perspective, the wedding cancellation had actually saved me a significant amount of money. Most vendors had refunded portions of our deposits, and I'd avoided the larger payments that would have been due as we got closer to the wedding date. What had started as an impulse revenge move had accidentally been a smart financial decision. I'd also gained clarity about what I actually wanted in a relationship. The experience had taught me to pay attention to how partners talk about me when they think I'm not listening. Social media posts, conversations with friends, and offhand comments to family members can reveal someone's true feelings more accurately than direct communication. The most valuable lesson was about consistency between public and private behavior. Someone who genuinely respects and appreciates their partner doesn't need to perform relationship problems for an audience. Real issues get addressed directly, not broadcast for sympathy and validation. Several months after everything happened, I ran into her at a grocery store. The encounter was awkward but civil. She mentioned that she'd learned a lot about herself and apologized for how she'd handled things. I appreciated the apology, but it didn't change my feeling that we'd been fundamentally incompatible in ways neither of us had fully understood. She asked if I ever regretted how publicly I'd handled the situation. I told her honestly that I regretted the necessity of it, but not the action itself. She'd made our relationship problems public first, and my response had simply provided context that her followers needed to make informed judgments about her complaints. We parted on cordial terms, but I felt relieved walking away. The woman I'd almost married was still primarily concerned with managing perceptions rather than addressing the character issues that had caused the problems in the first place. 6 months later, I'm in a much better place personally and professionally. The viral tweet had actually led to some unexpected opportunities, speaking at a conference about social media authenticity in relationships and connecting with other people who'd experienced similar situations. I'm dating again, but with much clearer boundaries about social media behavior and public representation of relationships. I pay attention to how potential partners talk about their exes, how they handle disagreements, and whether their public persona matches their private behavior. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the most dramatic response is also the most honest one. She'd been systematically damaging my reputation for months while pretending to be a loving partner. My nuclear response had simply made that contradiction visible to everyone at once. Looking back, I realized that the wedding cancellation tweet wasn't really about revenge. It was about refusing to accept a false narrative about my character and providing evidence that contradicted her claims. Sometimes the truth is dramatic, and sometimes dramatic responses are the most appropriate ones. The relationship ended, but I learned valuable lessons about authenticity, respect, and the importance of consistency between someone's public and private treatment of their partner. Those lessons will serve me well in future relationships, even if learning them required such a public and painful process.